Alright, well, working on the Q, came across something I haven't done in a while since I was an automotive technician. So I was replacing the crank angle sensor down here, and these are very hard to find now. So I had to go with an aftermarket one, and as I'm sure everyone's aware, aftermarket parts are very inconsistent in terms of quality. So this part was fine, the sensor's fine. The main issue I was having was the connector. The original connector, or the connector that came with the crank angle sensor, was not the correct size. So I ran into a situation where I needed to depin the aftermarket connector so I could repin the original connector so everything would fit together. This, in most cases, is not a big deal. The issue is that a lot of people don't have a depin tool. So this is the connector. This is actually the aftermarket connector. This is the original crank angle sensor. The aftermarket connector, the main issue with it here is that the little tabs inside aren't the right size. So I couldn't get it to actually latch in. So I had to depin this and put on the original connector. So I'm going to kind of share a little tip that I've done in the past with when you need to depin something and you don't have a depin tool, you can actually use an old wiper blade. So I'll show you that now. Alright, so mainly what you're needing out of the wiper itself, and this is again something I did as a technician, is because you had plenty of kind of bad wipers laying around in the shop. So obviously this relies on you having old wipers if you run into this. But yeah, anyway. So if you look at the wiper, you'll see these two little metal tabs that actually keep tension on the original rubber. You want to take out these metal bars. So you can use needle nose pliers or any pliers. You just got to get a hold of the metal tab and then just pull, and you'll be able to pull out that metal tab. You get 2 of them per wiper, which is actually pretty useful, and the rest of the wiper you can discard. So these little tabs, or these metal pieces, are stainless steel, and they're actually pretty firm, which actually makes them pretty good for tooling, because they're not going to flex too much and they're not going to chip or crack easily. So if we're doing things like depinning a connector, they're actually really useful. So what you want to do is you just get a pair of dikes or any cutting tool that will cut it, and you don't need to cut a whole lot here. We can just cut a couple inches. And you're left with this. Obviously you don't need to use both of these if you're just depinning one connector. However, I always keep these as spares in my toolbox because you can turn them into pretty much whatever you need. And as far as connectors go, there's a lot of different styles of connectors, and there's a lot of different styles of unlocking or depinning a connector. So what I did when I worked in the shop, when I didn't have a depinning tool that fit a specific connector, is I just pulled out one of these rods and cut it and ground it down to what I needed. So going back to the connector, you can see, maybe if we have enough light here, but going back to the connector, you can see that inside, at least for these particular pins, on this style connector, there is a little tab right next to each of these pins. That is a lock for this style of connector. See if I can get this a little closer to maybe make that easier to see. But right next to each of those pins is a little plastic lock tab. That is what's holding these pins in. And on the back side of this connector is just a simple plastic lock. Now every connector style is going to be a little bit different. Obviously I think this is going to be kind of a fair assessment to say this is one of the easier style connectors because the locks are directly in the front. Some connectors will have locks in the rear that you'll need to slide a pin into to actually disengage the lock. So again, you can use these to cut whatever size you need, slide it into the back to release the pin. Obviously, for whatever connector you're looking on, you'll want to look them up if you need to. There should be resources available online to, look up the connector type or the style, and that should tell you how to disengage the locks. And just in this case, this just happened to be an easy one, so it's good for demonstration at least. So again, going with the pin, or our little wiper blade insert here, is this insert is just slightly too big to pull that lock tab out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grind this down a little bit. And you also want to grind the sides down to make it slightly thinner because it's a little bit thick, and that will allow it to fit in here easily and push that lock out. But first, what we want to go ahead and do is disengage this back lock tab. Being this is a new connector, because this is the original aftermarket connector, I'm just showing it for demonstration purposes. It'll pop off pretty easily because there's no grime or built up around it. But again, this is a pretty easy connector to disassemble. So you take that plastic piece off, and now you see the backing of the weatherproofing for the connectors here. And it should look something like that when you're done with it. Doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be a little bit smaller so that it can help push that lock off the tab. So now that we've made our little depinning tool here, we should just be able to get this to go in there to release the tab. On these, you might hear them click, you might not. So there we go. You can see here on the back side that we were able to get that pin released. You just pull it out of the back. Obviously, as you're working on this, you want to keep in mind the position of the wire color. So this one's red, green, black. Obviously it's going to vary with whatever connector you're working on, but don't mix these up. Bad things can happen if you put powers and grounds in the wrong spots, or put a power or a ground onto a signal line. So just kind of keep track of your wires, or take a picture of it before you start disassembling it, if you have, any concerns about that. But from here we can just kind of keep continuing on depinning these. And what you can also do is, when you have tension on the lock, you can just hold it, push the pin down, that will release that pin. Looks like this one might stay without having to keep tension on it. So there you go. Able to depin all the pins on this connector. So that way I was able to swap this. This is the original aftermarket connector, but I was able to swap this connector with the factory connector so that I could actually use the aftermarket part, because we can't expect aftermarket parts to actually stay consistent and provide any kind of quality. As I'm sure most people working in the automotive field are aware of, there's a pretty huge issue right now with aftermarket parts just not working like they're supposed to. But, you know, you get what you pay for, I guess. And in my case, unfortunately, you can't get OEM crank angle sensors anymore for a 91Q45 in the States anymore. So I made a gamble on an aftermarket part, got what I expected, but I was at least able to get it to work instead of having to send it back. So I hope this was helpful. Figured I'd share some knowledge I've used in the past when I worked in a dealership for when we didn't have a pin tool that worked, and maybe this will be helpful to other people who run into the same issue.